sharing your personal Toastmaster journey with us. It was so inspiring, and it's so encouraging to see how far you have come today. By the way, Deanne is an immunologist at rheumatologist, sorry, at UMass Medical. Sorry about that. Our next speaker, Toastmaster Deb Skeath, has been a Toastmaster for 12 years. During that time, she has gone from being someone who was too shy to make eye contact during a Toastmasters meeting to being a speaker who has gained a great deal of self-confidence and is much more comfortable in front of an audience. Deb's background is in proofreading and editing, and she describes herself as a word nerd. How can you connect with your audience, hold their attention, and motivate them to take action by using storytelling? A warm welcome to Toastmaster Deb Skeath, who will highlight the power of storytelling.
Is this on? Good evening, everyone. Eye contact, vocal variety, the power of pauses. These are all skills that we learn as Toastmasters in a way to engage effectively with our audience. But storytelling, when I first heard that storytelling was a way to communicate with your audience and to really connect with them emotionally, I didn't know what to expect. Will I get bedtime stories at Toastmasters? Alice in Wonderland? The Three Little Pigs? Horton Hears a Who? You might be wondering, what's the big deal about storytelling? Well, I'm going to tell you how storytelling can be a very effective tool to make that connection with your audience and to have them buy into your ideas. I'll also share a couple of tips as we go along so that you too can use the power of storytelling. When you tell a story, you are creating an emotional connection with your audience. If your audience can identify with the person in your story, if they can feel what they're feeling, and if they see a parallel between that person and themselves, then the audience is much more likely to identify with you and to believe what you're telling them. Not that you're telling them lies, I don't mean that, but they're much more likely to accept what you're telling them and to subscribe to your point of view. Now, do we have any school teachers in the audience? Show of hands? Thank you, one. I used to be a school teacher back in England. I know, it's hard to believe. I know that you're just thinking with an accent like that, I must be from South Boston. But here's a true story about my teaching days. One day I was teaching a physical education class to my first graders. I said to them, children, I'm going to change the music. I'm going to turn around for 1 second. While I do that, I want you all to get into fours. I turned around for a second. When I turned back, everyone was on their hands and knees. Now, as teachers can really understand that I know the pain of being a teacher. I know that as a teacher you have to choose your words very carefully, especially with younger children. Be very specific. And God forbid you should be a high school English teacher and talk about dangling participles with your teenage students. That's a big no-no. But the point is that if you can create that emotional connection with your audience, they're much more likely to understand what you're telling them. They'll feel that you understand them and they'll really buy into what you're telling them, whether it's trying to persuade them of something or maybe trying to ask them to do something they may not otherwise want to do. The key thing about storytelling is that when you hear a story, you experience the information. But when you hear facts, you just consume the information. There's a big difference there. Studies of the brain have shown that when we hear stories, different parts of the brain are activated. So if you hear boring old facts, the brain just processes them as boring old facts. That's all they are, nothing too exciting there. But if you hear a story, the different parts of the brain are activated as if you were actually having that experience yourself. From the brain's point of view, it's as if the brain thinks that you're actually going through that experience itself. You're not just hearing about it. So storytelling can be a wonderful way to actually put thoughts inside your audience's minds, to really help them understand what you want them to do. Now, storytelling is a really great tool. It also helps us in many ways because as a speaker, it's easier for you to remember a story than it is for you to remember hard facts and data. And for an audience member, it's much easier as well to remember a story. If you have the flashiest PowerPoint in the world with all the bells and the whistles and the spinning things and the whirling things, if it's just going to be data and numbers that are dry and informative, but there's no emotional connection, then the audience isn't going to really remember that. But on the other hand, if you tell a story about a customer of yours with a little bit of insight into her life, outline the problems and challenges that she was having, then that story will resonate with the audience and they'll be much more likely to remember what you told them and what you asked them to do. Today we've just scratched the surface of storytelling. I know that many people here are brand new to Toastmasters, but I hope you can see what a powerful tool this can be to encourage people to do things they may not otherwise want to do, such as, oh, I don't know, maybe considering becoming Toastmasters members. Madam Toastmaster.